Bayes evidently thought so little of his theorem that he didn't bother to make it public. It must have been hard for her to maintain that smile, because by the time English class came around, her chin was quivering from the strain. The faculty takes a hands-off approach, providing equipment and guidance but largely letting students pursue projects that interest them. He takes his name from Verona, the city in which he was born and trained as a young artist, although he had settled in Venice by around 1553. These talks will be followed by a question and answer session where audience members can participate. Stephen just said he was sorry that my brother was so sick and that he was scared for him too. In other words, the objective is not to fight, but rather to make it clear that you are not a pushover and that this will not be a painless conquest. Roulette players who bet on red because the last 7 numbers to come up were black are using the same logic. The fact that she didn't use turn signals is perfectly consistent with the fact that joggers don't feel the need to tell us where they are going. A hypothetical imperative is a contingent command, one that we ought to follow given our desires, for example. She won the contest, but her mother refused to allow her to accept the prize, a stint in Vogue editorial offices in New York and Paris. The intensity with which what stylizes the work, imposing an intellectual pattern on the scene, makes this landscape both realistic and abstract. His statements were rejected by the conscious mind, and the very opposite of what he outwardly affirmed and claimed was made manifest. They know how important their support is because if an elephant in such a condition lays down, it wouldn't be able to stand up again on its own. The other members of the herd literally surround their weak friend and help it remain standing. If you can do that, you'll already be light years ahead of most managers in the respect you'll gain from your team members. Freezer doors stick because opening the door the first time allows some of the cold air to flow out at the bottom of the freezer. The majority of fine red wines are dependent on oak barrels for a vital component of their flavor, as are a good number of whites. I watched him in action and observed how he practiced this alternative medicine. It would have been easy for a lesser doctor to prescribe an herb or a potion and send this chap on his way. Many contracts state that the writer does not begin to receive royalties until the publisher has recouped the initial advance for the book. Analogies are a vital part of science because they help us to imagine the unknown with reference to that which we already understand. Although vital, analogies become dangerous when they become so entrenched that we confuse the analogy with reality. Clearly positioning itself on the health and hygiene plank, Dettol soap does not overly sell beauty, fragrance, freshness or economy. Whenever children wish, their mothers nurse them, and nursing continues until the child is 3 or 4 years old or until the mother becomes pregnant again. Construction creates the buildings and infrastructure that support all other economic activities, and so it is a necessary component of economic development. The share of electricity production from coal and peat takes up the largest portion in both 1971 and 2007. But being a newbie at anything has crucial advantages that veterans can only reminisce about. Many people achieve the biggest strides and experience the greatest satisfaction of their lives when engaged in something completely new. It seems strange to say that a life is going well, and yet refrain from saying whether or not it is good. In other words, don't give up. It's never too late, and real success is not the money you make but the way what you do makes you feel inside. They were those who understood that the largest asset we have is human capital. The structures in place for the former allow their children to access gatekeepers who can provide important school and professional resources. Those that have weathered chain store mania are banding together to create their own retail force to be reckoned with. It's their job to check the order and make sure we have all the details we need to complete it. That would leave his hands free, in case he had to grab and hang on to something to keep the wheel from pulling him out of the high hayloft. As long as we are not destitute, happiness is less about getting what we want than about appreciating what we already have. Their problem lay in finding a way to express American character while at the same time remaining true to their European heritage. They prefer the comforts of routine, of giving in to the animal nature that has them repeating the same compulsive action time and time again. Persuaded by this research, a few school districts around the nation decided to push back the time school starts in the morning. Since owls help keep the mouse population from getting too large, the plant population never dies out. His sketch exactly matched an unfinished painting Gifford had been working on when he died. In both males and females, the decreased bone density increases as they get older in areas of both high fluoride and low fluoride water areas. What occurred was so astonishing that, until very recent times, men were content to gape and talk mystically about the Greek genius. Thinking types communicate in an orderly and linear manner, emphasizing if-then and cause-effect linkages. The more frequently they fought, and the more intense the fights were, the more the mom rated the fighting as harmful. I read your recent memo in which you announced that the company would match any contribution to AMSW Radio. Jenny felt a greater loss to mourn now, and it fell upon her heavily, in a way she might not have expected. He then applied the mixture to all his hair, and it became, and it is now, of its primitive sandy hue. Imagine being not so sick that you couldn't function, but sick enough so that you felt terrible most of the time. When a picture was taken, there was no audible cue to indicate that the image had been captured. Selective as they are, 1-month-old infants do not deliberately choose to attend to faces and other engaging stimuli. For all its moral earnestness, St. Joan is enhanced by the Shavian ironic wit, a literary quality totally absent from Miller, here and elsewhere. Pharmaceutical stocks take up the biggest ratio in the portfolio of the institute investors, while retail stocks do in that of the personal investors. Educational administrators are the natural buffer of this paradox as it manifests itself especially in the public school setting. Apparently, the call is as much directed at the predator, in an attempt to scare it away, as to other chickens. The continued existence of such categories of people as rich and poor, fortunate and unfortunate, is taken for granted. The foundation of effective therapy is not only intellectual sophistication but the ability to accept. It is not always easy to refrain from giving advice, especially when we are with people we care about, but advice is not always the best thing we have to offer. On hearing their names, the kids reacted as if they'd just received an electric shock. The foundation could afford only 50 violins, forcing Burnett to hold an Opus 118 style lottery to determine who got in TED as if they'd just received an electric shock. More importantly, they are perfectly applicable to teaching young people exactly what I wanted them to learn. Half the participants in the auction were informed that they had to pay with cash. The other half were told they had to pay with credit cards. To support that belief, they point to many instances where 3 bad or 3 good things happened over a period of time. "68% of lawyers believe that they will win their case, when only 50% can." The yard was otherworldly, smothered in unnatural darkness, shivering with sound. Then they wrote a letter about one of them, either a letter of complaint to a housing authority or a letter of recommendation to a social club. In the developing stage, both birth and death rate begin to fall, but the descent of the birth rate is much more radical than that of the death rate. You would be wise to make a run for it, or do whatever you are supposed to do when encountering a tiger. These people should not be confused with those who are really thoughtful protagonists or antagonists. There's a dangerous idea circulating that the option of anonymity should always be at hand, and that it is a noble antidote to technologies of control. Others minimize evaporation by having fewer or smaller leaves, or by growing deep root systems that spread out to absorb as much as possible. Am I unhappy with you because of your personality flaws, or does my belief that you have personality flaws eventually make me unhappy with you? That is why we think that self-justification is the prime suspect in the murder of a marriage. Taking into consideration all your previous fundraising experience, we are turning to you for your expertise. The KJ tutorial program has proved so successful that we are in danger of outgrowing our funds. Rather than spending his time bowing and scraping to the man, Franklin decided on a completely different course of action. He that has once done you a kindness will be more ready to do you another than the whom you yourself have obliged. Sometimes it's not the things we don't know that get us into trouble. It's the things we know that just ain't so. The smartest of our deep ancestors would have stored their excess meat in the bodies and minds of others, not just their own kin. Groups of early humans who developed stable relationships and practiced this sort of reciprocal altruism were in a better position to prosper and multiply. It is they who teach us to see in nature new beauties of whose existence we have never dreamed. However, if you have several different representations, then when one approach fails you can try another. I stopped everything, moving, breathing, thinking, and stood on tiptoe peering into the leafy void. It seems odd that a sound can sometimes be heard at its source and vanish at a distance, only to be heard again still farther away. Since the air immediately above the ground is usually warmer than that in the higher layers, the sound waves are deflected diagonally upwards. The stories of soldiers, fighter pilots, firemen, and policemen, as well as mothers facing threats to their children, attest to this. A couple of buses go to Metsovo in the morning, but only one returns from Metsovo in the late afternoon. That allows for a day in the village. Metsovo sits at about 1,000 m above sea level, nestled among the peaks of the Pindos Mountains. Despite the changes within each region during the period, the rankings of Africa and Southeast Asia were the same in 2007 as they were in 2000. People who expect the best of their own work and are willing to challenge you will ultimately make you look good. The company exerted great pressure on Dr. Kelsey to give permission for labels to be printed in anticipation of the drug's approval. In fact, arguably, the poorer producers are more likely to cause environmental damage than those who can afford to do it the right way. Thinking too hard about an issue is, in many ways, as bad as making an instant choice. The same class that had squirmed restlessly in their seats 2 weeks before now greeted Mr. Flynn with a heartwarming burst of applause. They spray their window screens with a bottle of distilled water containing several drops of bitter orange essential oil. Fleas hate the scents. This enables the Indian housewife to start cooking her meals and to leave them unattended for several hours while she performs other chores. Mixed with water and made into a paste, it is used as a household flooring material. At the gong the youth pushed forward with a yell, only to be confronted with the unfamiliar 360th technique. Nearly all business here is done on credit, the period varying from 3 to 6 months.